My wife has always been my rock, someone I could completely rely on, so tonight's events came as a complete blindside. I'd been hoping for a bonus at work, but I was skeptical. Dressed in my dark blue tuxedo, the first time in 3 years, I felt sharp but incredibly out of place. Instead of unwinding in my favorite armchair with a drink, I was stuck at a fundraiser with colleagues and their spouses. It's a major social gathering in our small Midwestern town. I'd asked my wife to dress up, and she certainly delivered, perhaps a bit too enthusiastically. At 35, she was a breathtaking beauty, a head-turner in a revealing maroon dress. Despite her allure, she was mine, a fact I made sure was known. While I longed for the comfort of home, my wife seemed perfectly at ease socializing with the town's elite. She had an innate ability to connect with people, effortlessly drawing them into conversation. Returning from the bar, I discovered her engrossed in a discussion with Senator Thomas Norberto. A charismatic man, often likened to Tom Zizek, the senator's charm clearly held her captive in a way I'd rarely witnessed. I felt like an outsider observing her apparent fascination. When they seemed oblivious to my approach, I politely reminded the senator of my presence. He continued to engage with my clearly delighted wife, so I took a more direct approach, strategically placing our drinks between them until he finally took the hint. Acknowledging me at last, the senator excused himself to find his seat, leaving me seething. Muttering about his arrogance, I returned to my table. My wife, however, defended him, accusing me of rudeness towards a senator. I reiterated the importance of respecting our relationship's boundaries, but she simply rolled her eyes, a gesture I've always found disrespectful. To avoid a public argument, I let it slide. Dinner concluded, and the band started playing again. I asked my wife to dance, but she declined, which stung. While I made small talk with others, I kept a watchful eye on the senator, who eventually wandered out to the veranda. My unease intensified, and I followed him, only to find him with his arm around my wife, deep in conversation. I moved to intervene, but I was physically prevented from approaching them, with a stern warning not to interfere with the senator. "That's my wife he's touching," I snarled, as I was pushed back into the ballroom. I demanded the man who blocked me go and get her, threatening to make a scene. He cursed under his breath and reluctantly complied. The senator returned shortly after, looking flustered, feigning ignorance. I firmly took my wife's hand and escorted her out. The drive home began in silence, but the tension was palpable. Predictably, she erupted, accusing me of humiliating her. I stood my ground, reminding her of the respect due in our marriage. "You're being possessive, Reggie. You're crossing the line. You acted like a lovesick teenager," she retorted, her cheeks flushed. She fell silent after that, however, tacitly admitting my point. The strain between us permeated the rest of the week, casting a shadow over family dinners and creating an uncomfortable atmosphere, particularly for the children. On Wednesday, she requested a serious conversation, never a promising sign. It deteriorated quickly. She announced her intention to attend another fundraiser with the senator, insisting it wasn't a date. I questioned the appropriateness of this, but she denied any impropriety, claiming complete innocence. I challenged her definition of a date, pointing out the double standard compared to how she'd react if her friend Angie, known for her flirtatious nature, did the same. Her defensive reaction validated my suspicions. Clearly, she held some judgment against Angie's behavior. "It's completely different, and you know it," she argued. She actually tried to claim that going out with a U.S. senator wasn't comparable to an ordinary date. "There's a big distinction, Reggie. You can't go out with another guy. We're married, remember?" I reminded her of our vows. "You don't own me, Reggie. Even though we're married," she shot back. "I can do what I want." "I'm not saying you're my property," I countered, exasperated. "But you're the mother of our children. I don't want to break up our family." I pleaded with her, hoping she'd see reason. "You're being ridiculous," she dismissed, refusing to acknowledge the gravity of the situation. I was stunned when Hester emerged, ready for her non-date, in a breathtaking white gown. Our children were awestruck, asking why she was so dressed up. She stammered for an explanation, and I intervened, bluntly stating the truth. As the doorbell rang, I issued her an ultimatum: him or us. She opened the door to a security detail who announced the arrival of a black limousine waiting outside. "Remember to behave for Daddy," she said to the kids before stepping out. I stood there, speechless, the weight of her words hitting me hard. I could only watch, dumbfounded, as she left. Snapping out of my stupor, I turned my attention to my children, who needed me now more than ever. Drowning my sorrows in alcohol wasn't an option. Instead, I planned a few FaceTime calls, one to my parents and another to hers. The kids enjoyed chatting with their grandparents. We started with Hester's parents, anticipating their disapproval of her recent behavior. We shared some laughs until Hester's absence became noticeable. "Where's my daughter, Reggie? Have you hidden her?" my mother-in-law joked. I gently explained that Hester was out with Senator Norberto, expecting her to return the following day. My in-laws were shocked, unable to fathom that I'd let her go. I attempted to reason with them, emphasizing Hester's neglect of her family responsibilities, but they seemed to believe her actions were justifiable. Thankfully, the kids dominated the conversation, providing a welcome distraction. My mother-in-law urged communication and patience. Later, I called my parents, receiving significantly less sympathetic advice from my mother, who suggested I consult a lawyer. After the calls ended, I ordered pizza, watched a Disney movie with the kids, and eventually went to bed, though sleep was elusive. ESPN kept me company through the restless night. In the morning, I made pancakes and bacon, assuring the children that their mom would be back soon, even though I wasn't sure myself. There was no rush for her to come home, not after all this. Spending the night with another man, Hester arrived back in the black limo around 1:00 p.m., drawing the attention of our children and the neighbors. Usually they would rush to greet her, but this time they remained where they were, visibly disappointed by her less than stellar appearance. She still wore the same dress from the previous evening, now wrinkled and showing the signs of a sleepless night. I remained seated in the living room as she entered, making no effort to welcome her. "Hey," she offered, acknowledging the night apart. "Looks like you and the kids managed fine without me." "We did," I replied curtly. She headed upstairs, mentioning a need for a shower and some rest. I raised my hands in mock surrender, the realization solidifying. Our relationship was effectively over. My focus now shifted to minimizing the disruption for my children. Becoming a weekend dad was not an option. The question remained, could I bear it until the kids graduated high school? When Hester finally descended the stairs at 7:00 p.m., dinner was already prepared. I told her about the leftovers in the refrigerator, eliciting a weak smile. The kids sensed the lingering tension and kept their distance. Once alone, Hester accused me of turning the children against her. I denied it, pointing out that her actions were the root cause of their distress and that even the neighbors had noticed. "I didn't break up our family," she defended, shifting the blame onto me. "It's up to you. If you can get over your ego, we can fix this and keep our family together. But if you keep acting petty and nasty, we'll have to go our separate ways, and you can be Mr. Part-Time Dad." Her warning caught me completely off guard. I'd anticipated remorse, not defiance and anger. "It's 1 p.m, Hester," I retorted. "You couldn't get enough last night? Needed a half-day fling, huh?" She paused, avoiding eye contact. "We can get past this, Reggie, and go back to how things were. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry, but I needed this for myself, and I don't regret it." Her lack of genuine remorse stung. "That's a terrible apology, if that's even what it is," I remarked. "You're only sorry for hurting me, not for what you actually did." "It was amazing, Reggie," she said defensively. "And your actions," I countered, my voice hardening, "betrayed our vows and our family." I reminded her of her evident surprise when I discovered her in our guest bedroom. "We can't move forward unless you try," she pleaded. "No, Hester, it's too late now," I stated firmly, effectively ending the conversation. That night, I slept soundly in the guest room, exhausted from the past 48 hours of emotional turmoil. The next morning, I maintained our Sunday brunch tradition, making Belgian waffles. Mom looks rough like she hasn't slept, Eliza observed as we sat down to eat. Maybe you should go out more on Friday nights, I suggested to Hester. She burst into tears and ran to the bedroom, leaving the children bewildered. Did I say something wrong? Eliza asked innocently. No, sweetheart. Mommy probably just missed the waffles, I reassured her gently. Later, as I relaxed in my recliner, watching the Cubs game, the bedroom door flew open, and a distraught Hester stormed in, ranting incoherently. Calm down, honey. I can't understand you with all the drooling and spitting, I commented dryly. She sobbed, accusing me of making her look promiscuous to her parents. What a Kardashian, Mommy, Eliza exclaimed, entering the living room. I exchanged a look with Hester, who, regaining her composure, sent the children to their rooms before turning back to me. Tell me, she demanded, once the kids were out of earshot. I saw no reason to hide it from your parents, since you clearly saw no issue gallivanting off to a fundraiser with a senator, I explained. If they agree with me, that's not my fault. And by the way, my mom had a similar reaction, so watch out next time she's around. No, it's not like that, she began, then stopped abruptly. An amazing experience, I interjected. If looks could kill, I'd be a stain on this chair, but it doesn't bother me much. I gestured for her to move so I could see the television, and she quickly left the room. For the next 2 weeks, I slept in the guest room. Explaining this to the children, I told them I had a cold and didn't want their mother to catch it. I suspected Eliza saw through my deception, but she wisely kept quiet. A 7-year-old demonstrating such discretion. Impressive intelligence. One night, an hour after Hester had gone upstairs, I returned to our shared bed and quietly slipped in beside her. When the alarm rang the next morning, she snuggled close. Feels great, she murmured. It's time you came to your senses. She reached out to touch me, but I stopped her, gently placing my hand on her forearm and moving her hand away. I shifted our position so we were facing each other. Certain acts, I said softly, are best performed when you can make direct eye contact. Before I decide to sleep with you again, you will get tested for STDs and provide me with the results. You may be willing to trust Senator Norberto, but I am not. Tears welled in her eyes. She looked as if she wanted to speak, but then simply nodded. Her silence confirmed my suspicion. They hadn't used protection. This situation was becoming more intriguing by the minute. My original plan was to endure this until the kids finished high school, roughly 14 years until Nate went off to college. My love for them fueled my willingness to tolerate this situation. However, the prospect of long-term intimacy deprivation, especially sharing a house with an attractive woman, seemed unsustainable. Despite worries about my reputation, my feelings for Hester had significantly diminished over the past 2 weeks. The sight of her leaving for bed no longer brought the pang of sadness it once did. My own pain had begun to subside. My wife has always been my closest confidant, dependable and trustworthy. So it was a devastating blow when she made such a drastic mistake and faced the consequences that night. I'd hoped for a bonus at work, but doubts lingered. It was the first time in 3 years I'd worn my dark blue tuxedo. I looked the part, but felt utterly out of place. Instead of relaxing in my favorite chair with a drink, I found myself at a fundraiser with colleagues and their spouses, a major social event in our small Midwestern town. I'd asked my wife, Hester, to dress up, and she certainly did, perhaps excessively so. At 35, she was radiant, turning heads as she descended the staircase in a revealing maroon dress. Stunning, yes, but also provocative. Despite her allure, she was mine, a point I'd emphasized. I would have preferred a quiet night at home, but Hester seemed to relish mingling with the town's elite. Her natural charm effortlessly drew people to her. Upon returning from the bar, I found her engrossed in conversation with Senator Thomas Norberto, a charismatic figure often compared to Tom Zizek. The senator's presence seemed to captivate her, leaving me feeling like an outsider observing a budding infatuation. Noticing their disregard for my presence, I stepped in politely, reminding the senator that I was there. He continued chatting with my delighted wife, so I intervened more assertively, placing drinks between them until he finally got the message. When he finally acknowledged me, he announced his intention to return to his seat, dismissing me entirely. Fuming, I returned to my place, muttering about his arrogance. Hester, however, defended the senator, accusing me of being rude. I reminded her of the boundaries in our relationship, but she simply rolled her eyes, a gesture I particularly detested. Wanting to avoid a scene, I dropped the matter. Dinner passed. The band resumed playing. I invited Hester to dance, but she refused, leaving me disappointed. While making small talk, I kept an eye on the senator, who eventually made his way to the veranda. My concern growing, I followed him, only to find him with his arm around my wife, engaged in serious conversation. I tried to intervene, but someone stopped me, warning me not to mess with the senator, and physically forced me back into the ballroom. "That's my wife he's touching," I gritted out, as I was pushed away. Demanding that the man retrieve Hester, I threatened to cause a scene. He cursed quietly and turned back to the veranda. The senator returned shortly after, flustered, feigning ignorance. I grabbed Hester's hand and led her out. The ride home was initially silent, but I knew it wouldn't last. Hester unleashed her fury, accusing me of humiliating her. I defended my actions, reminding her of the commitments we'd made in our marriage. "You're being possessive, Reggie. You crossed a line. You acted like a lovesick teenager," she retorted, her cheeks flushing. She then fell silent, though, tacitly conceding my point. The tension between us affected the children, making dinner an awkward affair. On Wednesday, Hester insisted on a serious talk. Never a good sign. It ended badly. She revealed her plans to attend another fundraiser with the senator, insisting it wasn't a date. I questioned the appropriateness of this non-date, but she denied any wrongdoing, claiming innocence. I challenged her definition of a date, highlighting the double standard compared to her friend Angie, known for her flirtatious personality. Her reaction confirmed my suspicions. She clearly judged Angie while excusing her own behavior. "It's completely different, and you know it," she argued. "Going out with a U.S. senator isn't the same as a regular date. There's a big distinction, Reggie." "You can't go out with another man, Hester. We're married, remember?" I reminded her, emphasizing our vows. "You don't own me, Reggie. Even though we're married, I can do what I want," she retorted. "I'm not saying you're my property, Hester," I pleaded, "but you're the mother of our children. I don't want to break up our family." She dismissed my concerns as ridiculous, refusing to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation. I was shocked when Hester, ready for her non-date, appeared in a stunning white gown. Our children, Eliza and Chris Jr., were amazed, asking why she was so dressed up. She fumbled for an explanation, but I intervened, bluntly stating the truth. As the doorbell rang, I confronted her with a choice: him or us. She opened the door to a security guard, announcing a black limousine waiting outside. "Remember to behave for Daddy," she told the children before departing. I stood there, momentarily stunned, before turning my attention to the kids, who needed me. Drowning my sorrows wasn't an option. I arranged FaceTime calls with both sets of grandparents. The kids enjoyed chatting, starting with Hester's parents. I'd anticipated their reaction to Hester's recent actions. We laughed until Hester's absence was noted. "Where's my daughter, Reggie? Have you hidden her?" my mother-in-law joked. I calmly explained Hester was on a date with Senator Norberto. They were shocked that I'd let her go. I tried to reason with them, emphasizing her neglect of her family, but they seemed to find it acceptable. The kids, thankfully, took over the conversation. My mother-in-law urged me to communicate and be patient. Later, my own parents offered less sympathetic advice, my mother recommending I find a lawyer. After the calls, I ordered pizza, watched a Disney movie with the kids, and tried to sleep, though ESPN proved more captivating. The next morning, I made pancakes and bacon, reassuring the kids their mom would return soon, even though I wasn't so sure. There was no rush for her to come home, not after what she'd done. The prolonged absence confirmed what I had suspected. She'd spent the night with him. The black limo pulled into the driveway around 1:00 p.m. The kids and neighbors, usually eager to greet Hester, held back, clearly disapproving of her disheveled appearance. She wore the same dress from the night before, wrinkled and tired-looking. I sat in the living room as she entered. I made no move to greet her. "Hey," she said, acknowledging the night apart. "Looks like you and the kids managed." My reply was sharp. "We did." She headed upstairs, requesting a shower and some rest. I raised my hands in mock surrender. Our relationship, I realized, was over. My priority was now facilitating a smooth transition for our children. Becoming a weekend father was out of the question. The question loomed, could I tolerate this until they graduated high school? Hester finally came downstairs at 7:00 p.m. Dinner was already on the table. I mentioned the leftovers in the refrigerator. She offered a weak smile. The kids, sensing the tension, kept to themselves. Once we were alone, Hester accused me of poisoning the children's minds against her. I denied it, pointing out the obvious. Her actions had consequences, and they, along with the neighbors, had noticed. "I didn't break up our family," she defended, deflecting the blame. "It's up to you. If you can work on your ego issues, we can heal this and keep our family together. But if you continue to be petty and nasty, we'll have to go our separate ways, and you can be Mr. Part-Time Dad." Her words caught me off guard. I'd expected contrition, not anger and defiance. "It's 1:00 in the afternoon, Hester," I shot back. "Couldn't get enough last night? Needed a half-day fling?" She paused, avoiding my gaze. "We can get past this and go back to how things were. I know I hurt you, and I'm sorry. But I needed this for myself, and I don't regret it." Her apology, if it could even be called that, was devoid of sincerity. "That's a terrible apology, Hester. You're only sorry for hurting me, not for anything else." "It was amazing, Reggie," she said defensively. "Your actions," I stated, matching her intensity, "betrayed our vows and our family." I reminded her of the shock on her face when I'd found her with the senator. "We can't move forward unless you try," she pleaded. "No, Hester, it's too late," I stated definitively, ending the conversation and retreating to the guest room. That night, I slept soundly, exhausted by the last 48 hours of emotional upheaval. The next morning, I maintained our Sunday brunch tradition, making Belgian waffles. "Mom looks rough," Eliza observed as we sat down, "like she hasn't slept." "Maybe you should go out more on Friday nights," I quipped to Hester. She burst into tears and ran to the bedroom, leaving the kids confused. "Did I say something wrong?" Eliza asked innocently. "No, sweetheart," I reassured her gently. "Mommy just missed the waffles." Later, as I relaxed, watching the Cubs game, Hester burst from the bedroom, ranting incoherently. "Calm down, honey," I said. "I can't understand you with all the drooling and spitting." She sobbed, accusing me of making her look promiscuous to her parents. "What a Kardashian, Mommy," Eliza chimed in, joining us in the living room. I exchanged a look with Hester, who, composing herself, sent the kids to their rooms before turning on me. "Tell me," she demanded. "I saw no reason to hide it from your parents," I explained. "You saw no problem gallivanting off with a senator. If they agree with me, not my problem. And FYI, my mom had a similar reaction, so be careful next time you're around her." "No, it's not like that," she started, then trailed off. "An amazing experience, Beer," I finished for her. "If looks could kill, I'd be a stain on this chair. But frankly, I don't care that much anymore." I gestured for her to move so I could see the TV, and she quickly retreated. For 2 weeks I slept in the guest room, telling the kids I had a cold. Eliza, I suspected, knew better, but she wisely said nothing. 7 years old, and that perceptive, impressive. One night, after Hester had gone to bed, I returned to our room and quietly slipped in beside her. In the morning, she snuggled close. "Feels great," she murmured. "It's time you came to your senses." She tried to touch me, but I stopped her, gently moving her hand away. I turned so we were facing each other. "Certain acts," I said softly, "are best performed with eye contact. Before we're intimate again, you need an STD test. I need the results. You may trust the senator. I don't. Tears filled her eyes. She started to speak, then simply nodded, confirming my suspicions. No protection. This was getting interesting. I had planned to endure this until the kids finished high school, another 14 years. But the prospect of long-term intimacy deprivation was untenable. Despite concerns about my reputation, my feelings for Hester had changed. The sight of her leaving for another man's bed no longer stirred the same sadness. My own pain had lessened. Who was she now? The woman I married would have understood my disapproval of her affair. We met in college, dated for 3 months, married within 2 years. She was an actuary, precise and honest, traits that balanced my spontaneity and humor. Despite our differences, I'd envisioned us celebrating our 50th anniversary. Then Senator Thomas Norberto entered our lives. 10 days after returning to our bed, Hester handed me an envelope after work. Inside were her clean test results. "Hope you're satisfied," she whispered coldly. "You have no idea how humiliating that was. I may never face Dr. Sanj again." "Not my fault, baby," I replied flatly. "Stay faithful, and you won't be embarrassed." She hissed, but couldn't offer a retort as she walked away. I pressed the issue. "How often has the senator contacted you?" She started to answer, but I silenced her with a gesture. With a grimace, she handed over her phone. "Texts and calls from him, yes, but no evidence of further meetings." "Damn it," I muttered. "We're on thin ice." "Agreed," she replied seriously, pocketing her phone and heading to the kitchen. That night, she initiated intimacy. Instinct took over. I didn't feel much for her anymore, but I fulfilled my needs. I knew she was trying to win me back, but my mind was elsewhere. Hester's abrupt return home had fueled neighborhood gossip. Sympathetic looks from men, smirks from women. One evening, Eliza asked about a women's club. I maintained my composure, explaining Mommy's mistake and reassuring her. Hugging her, I hid my emotions, knowing this moment would forever be etched in my memory. A semblance of normalcy returned to our household, but it was a fragile piece. Whether Hester admitted it or not, things would never be the same. I couldn't fully trust her again. I couldn't forgive or forget the disrespect she'd shown me and our family. To borrow from Tina Turner, what's love got to do with it? 6 months later, Hester seemed to finally find the courage to speak. It was after an evening she'd initiated intimacy. I turned away to sleep, as I'd done habitually since the incident. I heard her crying softly. Reggie, can we talk?" "What's up?" I sighed. "Could you please turn around?" Her tone was laced with irritation. I sighed again, trying to conceal my annoyance, then turned to face her. She kept glancing at my eyes. "Do you realize how long it's been since we've been close?" "Say it, Hester," I insisted. "Say it. Have the bravery to admit it, Hester. We haven't been close since you went on your date." I stressed the word. "I noticed," she said quietly. "You satisfy me physically. Then you sleep. You make sure I'm happy, but it feels just physical, and you haven't hugged me since. I miss that closeness." "You can't even say those words, baby," I replied. "Your date. You cheated on me with him. Admit it. I'm not stupid. You went on a date and didn't come back until the next day. You make it seem so cheap and disgusting," she protested. "Yes," I agreed. "We were lovemaking on Saturday night. It was great. He was gentle and caring, just like you. Really, it was an unforgettable experience. That's why we're not making love anymore. Don't you see? You gave him something that, as you promised, was exclusively mine. And you enjoyed it. Unforgettable, as you said. Come on, Reggie. It was only one night. 2 days out of, statistically compared to the hundreds of days we'll be married. It's small. We can forget it, Reggie. If you're willing to try," she pleaded. "Thanks for the math lesson, Hester," I said, but I've never viewed our marriage as a math problem. Would you feel the same if I did it with Mary Jo Young? Mary Jo Young was a divorced blonde with a nice figure who lived nearby. Practically every wife on our street kept a close eye on her and their husbands. Wait, are you suggesting you want Mary Jo? No way, she exclaimed. Listen to yourself, Hester. I never said I wanted Mary Jo. That was you. I was just curious how you'd react if I did, I clarified. She looked confused for a moment, then her expression turned to anger as she understood my point. I can read between the lines, Hester. No need for words, I added smugly. She avoided eye contact. Do you realize, I continued, that because of what happened, other kids in the neighborhood bullied Eliza? They overheard their mothers talking about you. It wasn't pretty. Her anger turned to disbelief. Eliza never mentioned it, she breathed, taking it all in. I'm so sorry, Reggie. Sorry isn't enough, Hester. You called that night unforgettable. It was unforgettable, all right. Unforgettable for the betrayal. With that, I turned away and went to bed, unsure of her next move. Credit where it's due. Over the following months, Hester dedicated herself to being an exceptional mother. I'd traditionally been the primary caregiver, but suddenly, Hester took on her share of the responsibilities, driving the kids to activities, offering unwavering support. It made me wonder if she'd finally grasped that prioritizing our family over her own selfish desires was key to keeping us together. What a revelation. The children appreciated the extra attention, but even beyond her 8 years, my daughter demonstrated remarkable perceptiveness. Mom's really trying, Daddy, Eliza said to me one day. I hope she gets a proper apology for whatever she did wrong. I managed a genuine smile, acknowledging her keen awareness of the world around us. Everything appeared normal in the Wilkerson household. I worked diligently to maintain that facade. As for Hester, she seemed to be making a tremendous effort not only to keep up appearances, but also to win back my favor. We were two people sharing a roof, enjoying certain marital benefits, but the emotional connection was fractured. Despite her desire for normalcy, she seemed to expect me to simply cave eventually. Somewhere within me, remnants of affection for her lingered. 9 years of marriage, of her being the center of my world, aren't easily erased. But she made it harder on herself by continuing to communicate with Senator Prick, as I'd come to think of him. I regularly checked her phone logs and messages after her date. She'd ensured they were clean, but she didn't realize how simple it was to clone a phone and access all communications. He seemed to contact her regularly, while she attempted to keep him at arm's length, at least publicly. Can we schedule another date soon? I'll be in town, he'd texted almost a month ago. My hubby is still upset from last time, she'd replied. I can't risk it. Needless to say, I wasn't impressed. A month later, we marked our 10th anniversary with a family trip to Chuck E. Cheese. The kids had a blast, but Hester seemed distant. She waited until the kids were occupied with games before expressing her disappointment. We've always celebrated our anniversaries, just the two of us, with a special night out. You're changing tradition because you're still holding a grudge. When did you become so petty and small? She remarked. The answer to that question, I replied, is the same as the answer to the question about your date. You did this to me, to us, to yourself, Hester. Can't you just move past this? She pleaded. How often do you two communicate? I asked directly. She actually had the audacity to smirk before reaching into her pocket, retrieving her phone, and handing it to me. I tossed it in the air, catching it easily as it fell back down. I understand you've been disloyal, Hester, I said, but I also recognize your intelligence. I bet there's no evidence of your affair on that phone, not since I confiscated it the first time. However, I continued, there are records of past texts and calls. You may not have initiated them, but I've never heard you explicitly reject him. Why is that? Her cheeks flushed as she looked away. Yes, I muttered. Rhetorical question. Amidst the turmoil, my career and my children provided a sense of stability. My colleagues often commented that I looked like I needed a good night's sleep, or 6. I was fairly certain I was developing an ulcer. My alcohol consumption had increased, and sleep was a luxury. There were nights I lay awake for hours, staring at my wife, wondering where we'd gone wrong. She insisted she loved me, justifying her actions as separate from our relationship. She felt entitled to her night out with Senator Prick and displayed no remorse for her actions, only regret for hurting me. I waited for the other shoe to drop. Surprisingly, my mother-in-law became a source of support. She repeatedly expressed regret for Hester's actions. "We apologize, Reggie. We didn't raise her to be this selfish, but I truly hope you can find a way to move past this," she'd said during one call. "I know what you're doing for the children." I appreciated her concern. As I grabbed another cooler of beer to take outside to our monthly neighborhood summer picnic, I overheard female voices coming from our home office, a space usually off-limits to guests. I'd intended to redirect them to the living room, as most of the activities were happening outside, but some people occasionally sought refuge indoors for the air conditioning or quiet conversation. This conversation, however, stopped me in my tracks. "Yeah, when Reggie takes charge," I heard Hester say to her companion. "I can't help but think of him. He's so assertive, so driven, focused on his goals. Sometimes I can't shake the memory of that night. It's something I'll cherish forever." I heard laughter. Apparently there were 3 women in there. I missed the rest of the conversation as I fought the urge to vomit. Thankfully, I made it to the bathroom before I was sick, emptying the contents of my stomach. After cleaning up, I took the cooler outside, handing a couple of beers to the guys manning the grills. "Hey, Reggie, you all right? You seem a bit off," John Laszlo asked, casually concerned. "I'm good, John," I replied, before walking away. I stayed quiet for the remainder of the gathering. When Hester and her friends emerged from the house, I felt eyes on me, noticed smirks. Maybe I was paranoid, but it seemed like nearly every woman at the barbecue was sneering. Later that night, after the kids were in bed and the cleanup was finished, I confronted Hester about the conversation I'd overheard. She was sitting on a lounge chair, sipping wine. She seemed content, sipping from her wine cooler. I sat down next to her. "Did anyone show up today who doesn't know about your affair?" I asked pointedly. She looked taken aback. I held her gaze, feigning innocence. "I might have mentioned it to a couple of girlfriends recently," she admitted with a chuckle. "It was quite the experience." "He is a charming senator," I replied dryly. "Couldn't help but share, right?" "So first, you cheat on me," I accused, my voice rising. "Then you embarrass me in front of our friends, making sure every husband knows about your infidelity and labeling me as the betrayed one." "I am not unfaithful, Reggie, and I won't be labeled as such," she yelled back. "It was one mistake. I didn't sleep with some stranger in a cheap motel." Her eyes flashed as she rose from the lounge chair. "I've had enough of this," she declared, her voice growing louder. "You've been playing these games for over a year. Your wife had an affair with another man, a handsome, muscular man. It's time to move on. I will not be held hostage by your insecurities any longer. If you can't let go, that's your problem. Either file for divorce or get over it. I'm tired of living this lie, pretending we're the perfect couple. Decide now." Her outburst stunned me into silence. She walked away, leaving me alone to process her words. I'm a reserved man, slow to react. Some, including my wife, mistook this for weakness. I rarely panicked or acted rashly. The thought of not seeing my children every day was agonizing, but I held on to the hope of salvaging my family. I'd prepared for the worst, had a lawyer on standby, ready to fight for me. So, I took action. First thing Monday morning, Hester was served with divorce papers at her workplace. As expected, she wasn't pleased. 5 minutes after the papers were served, my phone began buzzing incessantly. I ignored her calls, anticipating the storm brewing at home. Stepping inside from the garage, Hester exploded. "You fool!" she screamed. "Your fragile male ego is bruised, so you humiliate me in front of my colleagues?" "Just like you embarrassed us in front of our friends and neighbors the other day," I retorted. "You practically begged me to file, so I did." She glared at me, but remained silent. I put down my things and spoke briefly with my children, reassuring them of my love, even though we wouldn't be living together anymore. Eliza, at 8, seemed to grasp the situation, having friends with divorced parents. Nate, however, was confused. I knew he'd struggle, but I trusted Eliza to help him through it. Living in a no-fault state, the divorce process should have been straightforward. Hester was in line for primary custody, the house, child support, and some alimony. But she contested everything. For reasons known only to her, she fought me tooth and nail. Her lawyer employed every tactic to drag out the proceedings, insisting on endless meetings, even suggesting marital counseling. "What's the point, Hester?" I'd asked in one session. "Your actions speak louder than words. You say you love me, yet you caused all this chaos. Then you have the audacity to tell your friends he's the best you've ever had. Why would I want to stay in this marriage? All I get is grief. I love my kids, but if I stay, they'll only remember a bitter, resentful man. But I love you, Reggie. Are you really fixated on one incident?" she pleaded. "Yes, he was exceptional, but it was a one-time mistake. Please forgive me." "I can't, Hester," I replied firmly. "You broke your vows, and you belittled their importance. I can't overlook that. You made promises to me. I hadn't planned to do this. Not really. But everyone has a breaking point. The beauty of a two-party political system is the contrast. No matter how you spin it, Senator Prick belonged to one side, which meant the opposing party would be thrilled with anything that tarnished his reputation. Over a year ago, after Hester's affair, I'd formulated a backup plan. I'd enlisted a well-connected lawyer in our city to approach the chairman of the rival political party. He was eager for any dirt on the senator, who had White House aspirations. I'd promised a substantial sum, but they were practically salivating for the information. The agreement was that the evidence would only be released at my discretion. Every month, my lawyer updated me on the chairman's increasingly desperate requests. This month, we were ready to deliver. The meeting, my first direct involvement, was set in my lawyer's office. After introductions, I pulled a sealed plastic bag from my briefcase and placed it on the conference table. The chairman's surprise was palpable. "Dear God," he whispered, staring at the bag's contents, "is that what I think it is?" "If you think it's evidence that could end Senator Prick's career," I replied, "then yes." They stared at the bag as if it contained gold bars. He didn't touch it, just continued to stare, dumbfounded. "That arrogant woman," I explained, "came home and went upstairs for a shower. Since she does the laundry, she probably assumed I wouldn't check the hamper." I'd waited until the water was running, slipped into the bathroom, and retrieved the underwear from the bottom of the basket. Everyone knows about DNA these days, from television. I was confident the test results would reveal 2 distinct DNA profiles. "And here's her toothbrush for comparison," I added, handing over another bag. "I assume you'll obtain the senator's sample for a match, unless you already have it?" I gave the chairman a pointed look. He reddened and glanced away. Just as I'd anticipated, he understood the implications, so there was no need to spell them out. However, I sensed an unspoken question in his expression. "Why?" I answered it for him. "Because she's not smart enough to know not to cross me. She betrayed me, yet she arrogantly assumed I'd eventually forgive her. Now she's flaunting it? To hell with her, and the senator she's screwing. Your career is finished, Thomas," I thought. "Damn you, Norberto. And you, foolish woman. How on earth could your weak husband obtain evidence of our weekend together?" I suspected he already knew, but the proof was undeniable. "How?" Norberto raged at Hester over the phone a week later. "How could he have evidence of our weekend?" "I don't know. I have no clue what you're talking about," she stammered. The call caught me off guard. I essentially confessed to tapping her phone months ago, which meant they hadn't been communicating that way, if at all. "What did you do, Reggie?" she asked, when she called me back 90 minutes later. I knew what she meant, but I was feeling vengeful. "I ordered a pepperoni pizza with garlic bread," I replied. Why do you care what I eat? Wait, how do you know what I eat? She snapped. I could practically hear her fuming. She hated when I acted foolish, as she called it. She may have thought I was weak, but she knew better. Well, being right about one thing out of two wasn't so bad. I'm not sure how you managed it, she said later, but it seems you got back at Senator Norberto somehow. He threatened to rough me up for something you did, though he wouldn't say what. Thanks, by the way. My parents are livid, I informed her. Yours are too. Eliza's been avoiding me, and you still don't seem to get it. What Thomas and I did was unrelated to our relationship. Yes, about that, I began. Senator Norberto, seemingly assured of re-election, suddenly dropped out of the race 8 months before the election, citing significant mental fatigue. With everything else going on, seeking female companionship was the furthest thing from my mind. I hadn't looked at another woman in months, not until my daughter brought it up. Daddy, Eliza asked casually, when are you going to start dating again? My children were spending the second weekend of the month with me. Linda's mom really wants to go out with you. I was stunned. My jaw dropped. Lost in the chaos of the divorce, I hadn't considered my future beyond caring for my kids every other weekend and a few weeks in the summer. Linda's mom brought this up, and you're okay with it? I asked, surprised. Well, she didn't tell me, Dad, Eliza clarified. I overheard her talking to Annie's mom, but, yeah, I'd be fine with it. I don't want you to be alone, but please, not Marcy's mom. None of us kids like her. Kids pick up on things. Linda's mom, Julie, had been divorced for about 5 years. A charming, vivacious blonde with curves, she still had that energetic cheerleader vibe. I'd never considered her as a potential partner. When you're married, you just don't think about other women that way. Or at least I hadn't. Was I naive? Eliza had clearly been looking out for me. It's okay, Dad. I'm almost 9. I understand about divorce and all that. Nate and I will be fine. Just take care of yourself. So I was back in the dating game. Julie became my first date, and it was nice. A little awkward, maybe, but nice. I explained that I wasn't emotionally ready for anything serious. Considering my recent re-entry into the dating world, she responded with a warm smile, telling me I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Julie offered helpful advice, a crash course in navigating life as a divorced parent. She also mentioned I'd likely catch the eye of other divorced moms in our kids' circle, given my reputation as a good father, a stable career, and, well, being not unattractive. She'd blushed when she said that. I dated Julie and a few other divorced moms. Sometimes I barely thought about Hester or our former life. I was lonely at times, but not enough to consider reconciliation. I couldn't bear the thought of being betrayed again. Hester, however, continued to downplay her affair as a foolish mistake, promising it would never happen again. A foolish mistake, I scoffed. It was poor judgment, disrespect, and ultimately selfishness. You prioritized a fling with a senator over your family. Her mouth opened and closed. She wanted to respond but couldn't. I half expected her to argue, even though she had no justification, especially since contacting the senator seemed pointless now. One Saturday, during dinner at my ex-mother-in-law's, she informed me he'd asked her never to contact him again. He seems to think you played a role in his decision to withdraw from the Senate race, and that I didn't intervene enough, she recounted. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. A few months later, some colleagues suggested a Thursday night outing to a new upscale bar with a dance floor. While married, I avoided such midweek excursions like the plague. Now, single, I found myself going out regularly. 4 of us found a table, ordered drinks, and soaked in the atmosphere. I noticed the 2 women as soon as they walked in. The first, early 40s, but dressed as if trying to recapture her 30s, wore a slightly unbuttoned silk blue shirt and a short skirt that accentuated her long, toned legs. With short, dark brown hair and green eyes, she exuded confidence. Her friend, slightly older, seemed out of place in the bar setting. Early 50s, perhaps, she radiated elegance and wealth in a designer sweater and skirt. Shoulder-length, silver blonde hair and dark eyes completed the picture of refined beauty. They sat at a nearby table, immediately attracting male attention. I felt a pull to ask one of them to dance, particularly the dark-haired woman, who seemed ready for a good time. She accepted dances from every man who approached her. The blonde, in contrast, danced sparingly, her movements more reserved. An hour later, I decided to approach the blonde. However, as I neared their table, the brunette intercepted me, grabbing my hand and pulling me onto the dance floor. I was captivated. We danced to upbeat music, then the tempo slowed, and she kissed me. I was lost in the moment. We left together, the passion carrying over to my apartment. That night, Rosie, as I learned her name, shared details of her life, including her recent divorce, which she and her friend were celebrating. She was an amazing lover. We dated for a month before she expressed reluctance to commit so soon after ending her marriage. I respected her decision, and we parted amicably. However, since that first encounter, I'd been curious about her friend. A few weeks later, I found myself alone at the bar of another upscale establishment, nursing a drink. It wasn't my weekend with the kids, so I had some time to myself. Then she walked in, alone, commanding the room's attention. A figure reminiscent of Megan Thee Stallion, with a cascade of rich brown hair framing her face and falling over her shoulders, she strode across the room in 4-inch stilettos and sat down next to me. I felt like I'd died and gone to heaven. I fumbled for a clever opening line, but before I could speak, she looked at me and asked what I was drinking. I told her, grinning, envious of her poise. "Excellent choice," she purred. "A man of impeccable taste, ordering the same, undiluted, as me." She spent the evening talking about the boutique marketing company she'd founded years ago. Not only captivating and intelligent, but a successful entrepreneur as well. We went back to her charming apartment. She mentioned her preference for intimacy in her own bed, a common preference among women, she explained, delving into the psychology behind it. With her impeccably toned physique, I couldn't believe she was 45. Our first encounter was unforgettable. An exceptional kisser, I felt a connection I hadn't experienced since Hester. In one night, Maria Washington opened up to me more than Hester had in 9 years of marriage. Maria confessed her dedication to her career and her lack of interest in children, preferring casual relationships. Despite developing real feelings for her, I knew a traditional relationship wasn't in the cards. We agreed to be friends with benefits. For the next year, we met monthly, until Maria unexpectedly fell for a much younger man. "You're one lucky guy," my ex-mother-in-law would occasionally say. Despite the divorce, we remained close, bound by mutual respect and our grandchildren. I still called her Mom, and her ex-husband Dad. "Could I ask you a favor, Reggie?" she inquired cautiously. "Of course, Mom, as long as it doesn't involve your daughter," I replied. Out of courtesy, I listened to her request. She wanted me to escort her personal assistant to their company Christmas party. "She's a good person, Reggie," Mom explained. "She went through a nasty divorce a few years ago. Her husband was abusive and a cheater. I don't think she's dated since. She was hurt, Reggie, and she needs a decent man to show her not all of us are scoundrels. And I think you're a decent guy." Ironic, being set up by my ex-mother-in-law. "Just one thing, Mom," I interjected. "Please tell me she's not boring." Mom chuckled, catching my humor. "I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, Reggie. You might even let us keep the kids for a night or two," she teased. Mom was right. I was pleasantly surprised. Cheryl, or Sherilyn as she preferred, was a delightful, charming woman with a great figure. Warm without being overbearing, she had an endearing habit of wrinkling her nose and squinting her green eyes when amused. Equally important, she possessed a genuinely kind personality. I made a point of staying close to Sherilyn throughout the evening, giving her my undivided attention, much as I would have with Hester. Sherilyn seemed to appreciate the gesture. While engaging in conversation, she tended to defer to others, which I found understandable, considering what Mom had told me about her background. We sat with my in-laws. Mom was, as always, gracious, while Dad was initially more reserved, though he warmed up as the evening progressed. I surprised Sherilyn with my dancing skills, honed during my marriage to Hester, who loved to dance. Sherilyn was also a skilled dancer, especially when the tempo increased, and we moved together seamlessly during slower songs, as if we'd been partners for years. I savored the feeling of her body against mine. As I escorted Sherilyn to the door, she kissed me softly and gave me her phone number. I realized I owed my in-laws more time with their grandchildren. 3 days later, I called Sherilyn for a date. She agreed to meet the following Friday at one of the city's finest Italian restaurants, followed by an art exhibit at a nearby gallery. Sherilyn dressed more provocatively than she had at the Christmas party, which I appreciated. We had a wonderful time. After 3 more dates, I felt it was time for her to meet Eliza, and for me to meet her daughter, Monique, who was also 8. We spent a pleasant afternoon playing mini-golf and enjoying a picnic in the park. It went smoothly, especially since the girls connected quickly. Nate, however, wasn't as enthusiastic, maintaining his 8-year-old's conviction that all girls had cooties. Sherilyn and I continued seeing each other several times a week, often including the kids in family activities. Everything was going well until a few weeks into the new school year, when I received an unexpected call from Hester. "I'm not sure what your girlfriend has been teaching my kids," she raged, "but your son was in the principal's office today for fighting. His face is all bruised. He's been suspended for 3 days. And all he can say is that it started with this Monique girl he keeps calling his sister." "First of all, Hester, you have no right to call my girlfriend names," I countered calmly. "I'll come over after dinner and take Nate out for ice cream. Let's not jump to conclusions until we know what happened." I heard her sigh before she hung up. After dinner, I picked up Nate and took him to a small ice cream parlor. As soon as he got in the car, I inspected his injuries: a cut on his lip, a scratch on his left cheek. "You should see the other guy, Dad," he joked. "What's the truth, Nathan Abraham?" I responded, using his full name for emphasis. He winced. "A kid was bullying Mo. I told him to leave my sister alone. He threw the first punch. Then I punched him. Hard. They said I broke his nose. It made a loud crack, and there was blood everywhere," he explained, trying to suppress a grin. "Will Mo tell me the same story?" I asked. "Absolutely, Dad. I wouldn't have punched him if he hadn't thrown the first punch. I was just defending Mo. You always tell me to look out for Eliza, so I figured it applied to Mo too. She's really small, Dad." Nate had a point. Monique had inherited her mother's petite stature, making her significantly shorter than her peers. I'd always emphasized the importance of protecting his sister, and it seemed he'd extended that protective instinct to Monique. It was a fascinating example of childhood innocence overriding adult experience. "I commend you for protecting Mo, Nate, but let's keep this between us," I told him. "I'll talk to the principal and see what I can do. You might want to update your mother on Mo's status. It seems you and Eliza haven't been keeping her fully informed about my life, which I appreciate. However, it might be better coming from you." I added, "Eliza understands completely. Kids mature quickly these days." "And Dad," Nate added, "when are you and Sherilyn tying the knot? She's amazing, you know." He was right. It was time to commit. The following day I spoke with the principal. The school had a zero-tolerance policy for fighting, regardless of self-defense. However, they also had a zero-tolerance policy for bullying. Consequently, after interviewing witnesses, the aggressor received a 6-day suspension. While I disagreed with the policy, I advised Nate to accept the punishment. I assured him of my support and promised to propose to Sherilyn as soon as I could afford a ring. Things got complicated when Hester discovered Sherilyn was Mom's personal assistant and that Mom had orchestrated their initial meeting. "What on earth, Mom?" Hester yelled, according to Mom. "Aren't you supposed to be on my side?" "There is no your side anymore, Hester," Mom had retorted. "He's not coming back to you. You messed that up completely. So why let a good man go to waste? Sherilyn is a wonderful woman, a good friend. She deserves someone like Reggie," explained. "Isn't it odd when your ex-mother-in-law sets you up?" Just one thing, Mom, I'd said. Please tell me she's not boring. Mom chuckled. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, Reggie. You might even let us keep the kids for a night or two, she'd teased. Mom was right. Sherilyn was a delight, charming, with a great figure. Warm but not overbearing, she had an endearing habit of wrinkling her nose and squinting her green eyes when amused. More importantly, she had a genuinely kind heart. I stayed close to Sherilyn throughout the evening, giving her my full attention. She seemed to appreciate it. She was engaging, but tended to defer to others, which, given her background, I understood. We sat with my in-laws. Mom was gracious, as always. Dad was initially reserved, but warmed up as the evening progressed. I surprised Sherilyn with my dancing. I'd learned to be a good dancer for Hester. Sherilyn was a skilled dancer, too, especially with faster music. We moved together perfectly during slow dances, like we'd been dancing together for years. I enjoyed the feel of her close to me. As I walked her to the door, she kissed me softly and gave me her number. I realized I owed my in-laws more grandkid time. 3 days later, I called Sherilyn. We had a great first date, Italian food, then an art gallery. She dressed more provocatively than at the party, which impressed me. 3 more dates followed, then I felt it was time for her to meet Eliza, and for me to meet Monique. Mini golf and a picnic. It went well. The girls hit it off, which was a relief. Nate predictably wasn't thrilled. 8-year-old boys and girls. Cooties. We started seeing each other several times a week, incorporating the kids into our activities. Everything was smooth sailing until a few weeks into the new school year. Hester called furious. I'm not sure what your girlfriend has been teaching my kids, but your son was in the principal's office for fighting. His face is bruised. He's suspended, and all he says is it was about some Monique girl he calls his sister. First, Hester, don't call my girlfriend names, I said calmly. I'll pick Nate up after dinner and get the story. Let's not overreact. She sighed and hung up. I took Nate for ice cream, inspected his injuries, a cut lip, scratched cheek. You should see the other guy, Dad, he quipped. Nathan Abraham, I said sternly. He winced. A kid was bullying Mo. I told him to leave her alone. He hit me first. Then I hit him. Hard. Broke his nose. Crack. Blood everywhere, he said, grinning. Will Mo confirm this? Absolutely. I wouldn't hit him if he hadn't hit me first. Defending Mo. You always say protect Eliza, so... Mo, too. She's small, Dad. Monique was small for her age. I'd always told Nate to protect his sister. It seemed he'd adopted Monique. Kids. Good job, but keep it quiet, I told him. I'll talk to the principal. Update your mom on Monique. You and Eliza haven't been sharing much about my life, which I appreciate, but this is for you to tell her. Eliza understands, I added. Kids are smart. Dad, when are you marrying Sherilyn? She's awesome. He was right. It was time. The next day I spoke with the principal. 0 tolerance for fighting, even self-defense, but also 0 tolerance for bullying. The bully got 6 days. I told Nate to accept his suspension. I'd back him up. And I'd propose to Sherilyn. Just needed a ring. Then Hester found out Sherilyn was Mom's assistant, and that Mom had set us up. Mom, what the hell? You're supposed to be on my side. No, your side, Hester, Mom had said. He's not coming back. You blew it. Why waste a good man? Sherilyn's wonderful. A good friend. She deserves someone like Reggie. Described Hester's scream as horrifying as she recounted the incident. Both of my children enjoyed Sherilyn's company. Eliza, especially, seemed to appreciate her nurturing demeanor toward me. Sherilyn had an innate ability to make me feel pampered, like the king of my castle, which in turn made me want to treat her like a queen. Eliza seemed to enjoy witnessing our affectionate banter. I'm not sure if you two are endearing or nauseating, she remarked one day, but I enjoy being around to witness it. A couple of months later, Sherilyn and I had a small wedding ceremony with just our 3 children, my parents, and my ex-in-laws as witnesses. The court clerk officiating the ceremony seemed surprised when my ex-mother-in-law stood as Sherilyn's matron of honor. "It's quite a story," I chuckled when she inquired. "Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition," a nod to Monty Python. But truth be told, nobody expects an inquiry from a federal marshal either. I was completely blindsided when two officials walked into my office one Monday morning. Apparently, the authorities were investigating a certain former senator's altercation and subsequent injuries sustained in the restroom of an upscale Houston restaurant. My name, along with several other aggrieved husbands, had surfaced as a potential suspect. "Can't say I'm sorry to hear about the senator's troubles," I remarked to the disgruntled marshals. "Nobody, and I mean nobody, deserves it more," I added with heavy sarcasm. "You do realize the fool slept with my then-wife almost 4 years ago? If I'd had any intentions of causing him harm, wouldn't I have acted long before now?" The grilling by federal agents, however, was only the beginning. A week later, a reporter from the Associated Press showed up at my office, seeking details about the incident. He'd somehow obtained a confidential list of 26 women the senator had allegedly had affairs with during his time in office. By this point, several people knew about Hester's rendezvous with the senator, though I certainly hadn't broadcast it. Hester herself had likely disclosed it to more people than I had, wearing it as a badge of honor. I couldn't help but wonder about her pride now, with news of the senator's misconduct surfacing, implicating her as one of his many lovers. "Why did you tell him that?" she practically shrieked at me over the phone. "I didn't. He informed me that your name was on the senator's list. All I did was confirm it. I wasn't going to lie to protect you from embarrassment." "Promiscuous? I am not promiscuous," she screamed before I ended the call. I confess I chuckled. I also briefly considered taking an extended vacation when the news broke. She messed up, and yet I was facing the embarrassing fallout. Sherilyn talked me out of it. "Don't engage. Stick to the truth. She cheated. You divorced her. Move on," she advised. Unfortunately, my children faced relentless teasing at school. We'd be dealing with the fallout of their mother's selfish choices for years to come. I also felt deeply for my ex-in-laws, who had become close friends. After the article came out, we invited them to stay with us for a couple of weeks. They mostly stayed inside, avoiding their phones. "I adore my daughter, Reggie," Dad confessed, "and I understand a parent's love, but I'm ashamed of her. Ashamed that she thought this was acceptable." No father wants his daughter labeled a homewrecker. As time passed, the scandal faded, and life returned to normal, or a new version of it. My children gradually spent more time at our house with Sherilyn, Monique, and me. It wasn't a formal arrangement, but our home became the neighborhood hangout. Hester initially objected, but things eventually smoothed over. I made sure Eliza and Nate maintained open communication with their mother to avoid accusations of parental alienation. Mom and Dad's frequent visits helped ease the tension. When the kids were with me, we rarely discussed Hester. She was still their mother, but in my life, she was an ex. They avoided mentioning her out of respect for Sherilyn, whom they now called Mom. I initially sensed some discomfort from Hester's parents with this, but it soon passed. They'd been close to Sherilyn even before our marriage. Amidst the upheaval, I paid little attention to Hester's dating life. I knew she was seeing people, based on the kids' comments, but I was still surprised when Eliza casually announced one afternoon, "Mom's engaged." A wave of sadness washed over me for what might have been. Then, Sherilyn's comforting embrace surrounded me, and the sadness quickly turned to joy for what I had. The years that followed were filled with a quiet contentment I hadn't known was possible. Sherilyn and I built a life together, a real partnership based on mutual respect, trust, and a shared love for our blended family. Monique and Eliza became inseparable, true sisters in every sense of the word. Nate, after a few years and a growth spurt, finally outgrew the cooties phase and became a protective older brother to both girls. My career thrived, and Sherilyn's marketing company continued to flourish. We traveled, celebrated milestones, and navigated the challenges of parenthood together, a united front. Hester's engagement, as it turned out, was short-lived. Her fiancé, a man I never met, reportedly left her after discovering the full extent of her affair with the senator. The news, while not surprising, still brought a pang of sadness. Not for her, but for the life we could have had if she'd made different choices. Her reputation in our small town never fully recovered. The whispers followed her, a constant reminder of her betrayal. She lost her job, struggled financially, and became increasingly isolated. The kids, while maintaining a relationship with her, grew more distant as they got older, recognizing the pain she'd caused. They saw the stability and love Sherilyn and I provided, a stark contrast to the chaos and drama that seemed to perpetually surround their mother. One evening, years later, Eliza came home from college for a weekend visit. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, when she turned to me, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You know, Dad," she said, "I used to think Mom was the victim in all of this, that you were being unreasonable. But now, I get it. I see how much she hurt you, how much she risked, and I see how happy you are with Sherilyn. You deserve that happiness." Her words, a validation of everything I'd endured, brought a sense of closure I hadn't realized I was still seeking. Hester, meanwhile, continued to spiral. She moved out of state, leaving behind the wreckage of her life. The kids occasionally spoke with her on the phone, but the conversations were strained, filled with awkward silences and forced pleasantries. She never truly took responsibility for her actions, always blaming others for her misfortune. Her life, once filled with promise, became a cautionary tale, a testament to the destructive power of selfishness and poor choices. My life, on the other hand, blossomed. Sherilyn and I celebrated our 20th anniversary, surrounded by our children, their spouses, and our grandchildren. Looking around at the happy faces, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. I had found love again, a deeper, more meaningful love than I'd ever known. And Hester? She became a distant memory, a ghost of Christmas past, a reminder of the life I'd left behind, and the happiness I'd finally found. The small detail of a migraine, a whispered conversation, had indeed tipped the scales, leading to the destruction of one life and the creation of another. And in the end, I was grateful for the unexpected path it had set me on.